Hey guys, in this video let's review Touhou New World, or what some people call Touhou meets Ys. They are quite similar in nature. Also, it's worth mentioning that I knew about this game since it was launched, but I heard that it was a bit too easy and had some issues here and there, so they fixed a good number of them and added some extra things, but I'll cover most of those details in the gameplay section. Without further ado, let's check the usual topics. Story-wise, this spin-off begins explaining pretty much what is Gensokyo, which is a place that was separated from reality by Yakumo, with the objective to have a safe place for yokais to thrive, as humans began to reject what they saw as illogical, or in other words, the yokai started to disappear, and that is how the barrier protects the illogical from the logic. After this small introduction, we are presented a girl named Sumireko, who believes that the real world is quite boring, and that she wants to go to Gensokyo. So from here, it's going to depend who we choose to begin this adventure. Reimu will see a giant doll flying over her shrine, thinking that Yakumo had something to do with it, but Yakumo denies having any kind of link. So Reimu sets herself to fight this doll, but things don't go that well, as she was unable to move at some point in that fight, and somehow, after receiving a direct hit, she woke up inside of a classroom, where later she gets to meet Sumireko, human who helps Reimu to come back to Gensokyo. While on the other hand, Marisa had a dream where she was in that same classroom, but little after she woke up in her desk. Curious by that situation, she looks for Renosuke, and after some words, he gives an occult ball to Marisa, in exchange for every piece of information from these dreams. That is how Marisa placed this sphere by her side while sleeping, and voila, inside of that world, where later she confronted a huge drone, but similarly, she was unable to move, and yep, she also received a direct hit. But in a weird turn of events, she woke up in the middle of an ice cave, where she found Sumireko, and after some moments, they are in Gensokyo. So that is pretty much how both the stories begin. Now, what can I say about them? If you're looking for something canon, this is not going to be a game for you. Well, it is true that they are quite right about plenty of interactions. There are some that are taken out of the pocket, with misconceptions here and there. However, let's keep in mind that it is fan-made, so no biggies from my side. But I believe these kinds of stories are lighthearted and just to kill some time. Yeah, if you know the characters from other Touhou games, you might find it quite charming, as some parts are kinda goofy. For example, where the main protagonist changes from one game to another, so it doesn't really matter who wins a particular fight, as the heroine will change in the next entry. And like that, you will read other side jokes like, I will only borrow the book that you won't see ever again. And ironically, in this game Reimu will end up with a lot of gold. But the main topic will check this idea about dreams and how Gensokyo and the real world are kind of fusing together. Or at least, that is the part of the main idea, because later they go after the space bunnies, and a clash between people from Gensokyo and Lunarians ended up happening. Of course, it's worth mentioning that while the main idea is the same, plenty of events will change between Marisa and Reimu, even the characters they interact with. With this, I mean to say that this is an enjoyable story, but nothing to say, oh my god, it's amazing! As it is good enough, but of course if you cannot stand these kinds of trivial conversations, yeah, it may not be for you. As for the gameplay, let's divide this section into the general idea of the game, customization and bosses. One of the main issues with this entry was its difficulty, tending on the easy territory, and if you know some Touhou fans, those who play the original games, you know that they like to suffer, and that was supposed to be addressed with the bullet hell difficulty and the bullet hell plus, which I didn't see. Not sure if I have to do something in specific, but after finishing the game twice, it didn't appear, so no idea. Well, the main deal with the difficulty is that if you have experience in other action games and you want, let's say, a decent challenge, straight up go for bullet hell. While it says that it is complicated and that you cannot recover and so on, I will say that the difference between one and another feel like you change from normal to something slightly harder. On the other hand, if you're not that experienced in these kinds of games, normal is okay. There will be some bosses that most likely will bully you a bit, but nothing to break a deal. These complicated battles appear at the mid of the game and the very last sub-quest. Well, here the main idea is that per stage you can go around beating some enemies left and right. In essence, these places are quite basic. Some are pure platforming, which is for the most part decent, nothing crazy. Maybe there was only one place that was quite annoying for me, but aside from that, decent. Other stages have different routes, but sooner or later they end up leading into the same place, or some others ask you to go to place A, then B, C, and so on. Nonetheless, I will say, they are basic in nature. Where this game needed some extra work was around these areas with extra routes, because in all honesty, I didn't feel like they have real rewards after exploring. Oftentimes they will have random spawns or little sub-bosses, but aside from that, there is no real reason to look around. On that front, some special items or extra skills would have helped these places a bit more, as you will feel that it is kinda worth it. But as it is, in all honesty, you can rush to the boss and call it a day, as the best you will find is a random golden loot. But if that is the case, the only places worth checking out are late dungeons, just to change gear and move on. It is fair to mention that there is also a point where its gameplay will feel stagnant, as you will replay some places at least twice, as later some subquests will appear. The subquests that I felt worth doing were the ones with special rewards for your attacks. Aside from that, unfortunately there is a point where it can feel monotonous, but it's worth mentioning that this game is quite short. In something like 8 to 12 hours you will be done with it, and that is something I really appreciated. From time to time playing something quite short, it's really good. The customization in Touhou New World is decent. Each character plays slightly different. Reimu tends to go up close and personal, with some outward projectiles, while Maris is more about long-range moves, with few close physical attacks. As you advance, new skills will be unlocked, so you can select whatever you feel much more comfortable using, and your loot will be quite random in nature. Let's say that the same item can have so many different stats that you will be looking at items a good chunk of time. My recommendation is sell them if you see that they are not worth using, as you will gather lots of them. On this front, it depends how you wanna play, as the stats can go all over the place. And of course, as chapter pass, you will get better and better equipment. Down the line, there is a forge option that is really random, where you can re-roll your equipment stats, but in all honesty, you can get so many results that it feels like it's not even worth trying. There is another option where you can roll a random item, but then again, a random roll, so I just use it like 3 times and move on. In any case, the most important one is where you can upgrade specific stats, so you can set your character for whatever you want. On this front, what I would have liked to see is the chance to have different loadouts, because in the normal stage I would run with item drop, but once finding the boss, I had to change all of my equipment to something with more HP and damage, or crits. This would have saved me plenty of time and confusion with items that sometimes change 1 or 2 points. In any case, the best part of the game came as boss fights, where you will fight plenty of different characters, all of them being quite dynamic in their way of moving. Yes, at first they are quite straightforward. Probably the hard difficulty would be better with an extra push in HP, as the difference between normal and bullet hell is like 10%, or at least that was the difference with the very last boss. And in all honesty, that 10% isn't that big of a deal, considering that you can push critical hits and critical damage, so even when we talk about 20k, in few moves you can rush those numbers. In my humble opinion, it would be better to set bigger differences between difficulties, even adding extra attacks or things you don't see normal. Nonetheless, the real challenge comes a bit later, as some bosses became quite fast and unpredictable in some attacks, but it is fair to say that you can abuse from your jumps, as some have kind of standard moves that can be avoided without that big of a deal. This is something that needed to be rewarded, or at least I would say, a variation between upper and lower moves would be more interesting. In the end, the hardest boss is like F your jumps. If my special attack hits you, it's one hit KO. If you don't properly avoid, I will hit you. And they can be kind of erratic. Those fights were the ones I enjoyed the most, because they felt like real bullet hells, where you need to pay close attention to the enemy moves, like okay, it looks all over the place, but if I move like this and that, I can make it. And yes, in all honesty, you should have abused from those moves a bit more, like make the player learn each boss in their own way, or at least that is what I will say with a real bullet hell. For this kind of execution, what happens here feels like a wasted opportunity. At the end of the day, I had a lot of fun with these fights, but I believe small tweaks would have delivered a better experience, so I will say it is a 7.5. What this game needed were small fixes, like turning some boss attacks into something a bit more unique, maybe add another difficulty for the masochists who enjoy bullet hells, And do not throw areas for the sake of placing extra rooms. This is not a labyrinth game or something along those lines. But for this case, proper rewards have to be given, so the player feels like it's worth running around searching secrets left and right. In the graphics section I check performance, glitches and other visual things. This is the Switch version of the game. The only glitch I saw was while running around in the overworld, and suddenly the ground ate me. Yeah, falling into nothingness. But few seconds later you will appear above, so no biggies. Not sure if the game was purposely designed in such way that with some attacks the frames drop so you can more or less react. While I know this may sound wacky, in plenty of bullet hells those are added hiccups to give the player a chance, otherwise it feels like Touhou sits without a patch. Your response and speed will not go that well. And I phrase it like that because those are counted fights. Against the hardest boss you won't see that, but against some others it happens with those special moves, but aside from that, no issues here. Now this is a quite beautiful game, or at least that is my perception of plenty of areas, with vivid colors and details. If you take a moment to look at executions around, the ugliest things are the enemies and your character. Aside from that, the general environment is simply superb, where you will traverse some common looking shrines, places reminiscent to festivals, volcanoes, frozen caves, the space, and different meadows, all of them quite charming. But yeah, unfortunately once you start to check the kind of enemies that run around, you can either think like, maybe they try to be as close to what a Touhou game is, as they do not have that much diversity in enemies. So here you will see some fairies, from small ones up to boss classes, plants, some goofy umbrellas and things taken as yokais, bunnies, the somehow funny kappa, mimics, doll hands and so on. My main complaint here is that sometimes the enemies and their areas do not feel like they match that well, but that is going perhaps a bit too picky with some mobs like rogues and those doll hand things. Aside from that, I consider it a good looking game, with nice executions. It is an 8. Just because I believe it had plenty of beautiful areas, I can overlook some enemies and mismatches, as well as some repetitiveness. And last but not least, its music. Like some other Touhou games, here you will listen to some rearranged tracks while fighting bosses, so yeah, expect to hear On Owen Was Here, Bloomy Nobly, Dull Judgment and so on. Those are details I like a lot, because they have a cool quality and general execution, while not going for the soundpads and heavy use of synthesizers. For some reason they remind me a lot to something out of ancient Japan, but just a few tracks, because you will hear some jazz, electronic, metal, rock and whatnot. Even the normal stages have interesting tracks from the original entries. Where it may feel a bit hollow is that some areas ask you to go for a bit too long, looping the tracks perhaps many times. But those are counted stages, because even if I consider the original tracks, for the most part I would say I like them. Maybe not a lot, but I definitely like them. So out of like 40 tracks, I would gladly hear like 30 of them with no issues. So I am sure that if you enjoy the original works and some remixes, this OST is going to be of your liking. Now if I have to specifically point something, those are the sound effects. Because there was a point where I was there thinking that the general effects are perhaps a bit too hollow, like the sounds are there but they needed a spice of impact. Not sure how to describe it, then again, it is just me going picky with it. And yeah, there's no voice acting, so every interaction is like a visual novel. I have no issues with that, but it's worth mentioning. For me the general soundtrack is an 8.5, I definitely like it. Touhou New World final score is a 7.6. I consider this game slightly above decent. The truth is that I had a lot of fun with it, but I won't deny that there are points where it grows stagnant, particularly when you have plenty of options to explore but there are no real rewards, and like that, it is the combination from multiple little details that diminish the experience. But aside from that, it was an enjoyable game that I recommend for those who want to have a short playing session. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.